Carl Eric Brandt was born in 1957 in Connecticut to German immigrant parents, Herbert and Ilse. Herbert was a good worker who had worked his way up from a laborer to an engineer, and provided his family with a pretty good life. Carl had 3 sisters, Angela, 3 years older than him, and Jessie and Melanie, who were both 10 years younger. Carl was known as the nicest kid you could ever meet growing up. He wasn't really a rule breaker and was described mostly as being a little shy. At age 11, his family moved from Connecticut to Indiana. Carl wasn't happy with this, as he struggled to fit in at his new school because of his shyness. Carl apparently looked forward to his family's vacations to Florida whenever there was time off school. However, the vacation over Christmas 1971 caused a tiff between Carl and his father. As the two had gone hunting, the family dog ran away into some shrubs. When it refused to come back, Herbert got frustrated and shot it. This apparently affected Charlie a lot and he said he wanted to cry, but stopped myself. This could have possibly been a motive to what happened the night of January 3, 1971. The family had returned home from their vacation the night before, and at 9 p.m. that day the house was peaceful. Jessie and Melanie were asleep. Angela was watching TV in her bedroom and Herbert and Ilse were in the bathroom together. Charlie, however, was downstairs working on some homework and began to feel completely on edge. Impulsively, he went up to his father's bedroom and stole a handgun. He burst into the bathroom and shot Herbert repeatedly. Ilse, who was 8 months pregnant at the time, began to scream for Angela, which prompted Charlie to shoot her too. Charlie then burst into Angela's room. He tried to shoot at his sister too, but hadn't realized the gun had run out of bullets. He dropped it to the floor in frustration and began sobbing that he didn't want to leave. Angela tried to calm her down. She hugged him and claimed that she was going to help him clean up this mess. She said she would help him get out of town and knew somewhere they could run away to. She told him to go get Jessie and Melanie. And when he went upstairs, she made a dash for the door and ran out the house. Charlie gave chase while screaming that Angela broke her promise once again, that she claimed she would never leave him. Angela rushed to a neighbor's house and explained what had happened. Charlie arrived at the house too and confirmed he did shoot his parents. Police arrived at the scene shortly after. Herbert was still alive and taken to hospital, but Ilse was dead and so was the baby she was carrying. Carl was taken to jail. In custody, Charlie cried and apologized to his father. He said he didn't really have a motive for the shooting, that it was a build-up of a lot of things, but repeatedly mentioned the dog incident as a traumatic experience for him. He said he didn't want to kill parents, and didn't enjoy what happened. The jury decided Carl wasn't criminally responsible for what he did, and instead made him stay in a psych hospital for a year. His family was broken by what happened. Angela even dropped out of school shortly afterwards. But once he returned in 1972, it was clear the homicide was something they would never speak of again. Herbert moved his family away to Florida and the youngest sisters grew up thinking their mom died in a car accident. Part 2. Once Charlie was back from psychiatric hospital, he was much more outgoing and friendly. Herbert eventually decided to move back to Indiana with Jessie and Melanie, while Charlie stayed in Florida and lived with Angela briefly. Angela left him, and Charlie then lived with his grandparents. He got a degree at a local community college in electronics and became financially successful. He met Terry Helfrich, who worked as a manager at a retail store and wanted to marry her. Carl told his sister that he planned on proposing to Terry but didn't know if he should come clean about murdering his mom. Angela became upset, saying she didn't think he ever realized how bad what he did was. Carl's relationship with Angela was strained ever since. It's unknown if Carl did tell Terry that he killed his mom, but it appears he didn't, as she never referenced it in her diary or to friends or family. They married in 1986, and Carl refused to invite any family members. Carl and Terry were a very normal, happy couple, and Terry's friends thought they had an amazing relationship, even though Carl was quiet and reserved. However, Terry wrote in her diary about Carl acting strangely and emotional. In 2004, Hurricane Ivan struck the Florida Keys and residents were asked to evacuate their homes. Carl and Terry were affected, so they evacuated and decided to stay with Terry's 37-year-old niece, Michelle Jones. Michelle lived in Orlando and worked as a sales manager for a shopping channel. Carl and Terry arrived at Michelle's place on September 2. After they briefly visited Herbert and his sisters, they noted he seemed a little intense at the time, like he was saying goodbye. When he got to the house, it appeared he didn't want to leave. Michelle regularly called her friends and complained about Carl and Terry's behavior. Apparently they often fought with each other and delayed leaving. By September 13, she had stopped answering her phone and her friends became worried. On the 15th, a friend of Michelle's appeared at the house to check on her. When no one answered the door, this friend looked through the garage's glass door and saw Carl Brandt dead. He had hung himself with a tangled bedsheet and dangled from the garage's rafters. She called police and Detective Rob Hemmett arrived to investigate. He found Terry's body on the living room couch. She was stabbed several times, and naked from the waist down. He would then find Michelle's body in her bedroom. After being stabbed to death, her body had been completely torn apart. Her head had been chopped off. Her chest had been mutilated and her heart removed. And attempts had been made to remove her leg. All of her underwear had been taken out of the drawers and scattered across the floor. Charlie's own blood-stained clothes were among them, along with 2 bloody knives. Part 3. Police speculated Charlie had an obsession with Michelle for some time. A search of his own home revealed all kinds of obsessions. He often made web searches for necrophilia and gore, always involving women. He also infamously had an anatomy chart of a female on his wall. Ron Hemmett believed Brandt to be a serial killer and began to dig through old unsolved cases from Florida. Some sources say he highlighted 26 cases. However, 4 are commonly mentioned along with Charlie Brandt. 1. A 12-year-old who went missing from Austin, FL on September 20, 1978. She was last spotted at about 7 in the morning waiting at the bus stop. 12 days later, her skull was found in a wooded area. It had been placed in a paint can. Even though it had only been 12 days, it was completely bone. But it was identified as Carol through dental records. The fact she is mentioned on Brandt's Wikipedia page as a victim. This article suggests he's been ruled out, and the case is very much still open. 2. A 20-year-old who vanished while partying on No Name Key Island. FL on 17 December 1988. Sanders was from Michigan and the youngest of 6 kids, and was diagnosed with leukemia at age 9. She had entirely recovered after years of suffering 2 years before she was murdered. On the 17th, she joined a group of people at a party who remarked they didn't know who she was. They saw her leave at about 9:30. Lisa's body was found on a dirt road the next morning. Her murder was unbelievably brutal and downright weird. Had been beaten, stabbed, and apparently dragged behind a moving vehicle by a rope about her neck. Her body had been mutilated. But investigators at the time said this was done by animals. All articles about Sanders seem as though they have no idea who killed her. So he may have been ruled out. Guy Scott, who was later convicted of the murder of a woman in Ohio, attended the party Lisa went missing from, so is the prime suspect in Lisa's death. Among others, 3. A 38-year-old described as a former beauty queen, lived on a boat in a lake only miles from Charlie's home. On July 16, 1989, her body was found, her throat slashed and mutilated and with her heart removed, as Charlie had done to his niece. Witnesses saw a man similar to Carl fleeing the scene of the crime, and Terry's diary noted he was acting strangely and distant around the time this happened. 4. Darlene Tola, a 35-year-old killed in 1995. Described as a prostitute and found dead on a highway. She'd been wrapped in plastic and had her head and heart removed. Evidence in Charlie's car and mileage records suggested he could be her killer. 5. Note: it hasn't been publicly revealed which 22 other cold cases he's been linked to. Part 4. It appears Carl Brandt killed Sherry Perishow and Darlene Tola. Both of them were drifters. He had decapitated and removed their hearts. He killed himself after murdering a more forbidden victim, Michelle, who he had gone the extra mile with when it comes to mutilation. Likely if he killed besides Sherry and Darlene, he killed drifters and sex workers, and probably left them in water so they were never found. Personally, I think he didn't start killing like this until 1986. After his sister's rejection of him. Some missing women who could be connected to CB. 1991. 39 Yo. T. 2003. 44 Yo. 2003. 42 Yo. 2002. 44 Yo and 1998. 44 Yo. What are your thoughts on his true body count? And are there any cases you personally see a connection with him? In Part 2, I'll write up on the cases of Lisa Sanders and Diane Augut in more depth.